You're standing on the deck of a warship, salt spray stinging your face, the Mediterranean sun beating down on your armor. You're a Roman marine. You've stormed beaches. You've broken shield walls. You've seen men die in every conceivable way. But right now, as your quinquareme approaches the walls of Syracuse, you feel something you've never felt before: pure, primal terror. Because dangling from the battlements above you is a rope. Just a rope swaying gently in the sea breeze. And the moment you see it, your captain screams the order to retreat. Oars snap as rowers panic. Men are throwing themselves overboard rather than wait to see what that rope is attached to, because everyone knows what comes next. The rope isn't decoration, it's a fishing line, and you're the fish. If stories of overlooked minds who reshaped history fascinate you, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. It's genuinely incredible that we can explore these ancient mysteries together across continents, cultures, and centuries right here, right now. This is Syracuse 212 BC for 2 years. The greatest military machine in the ancient world has been laying siege to this city, and for 2 years they have been losing not to an army, not to superior numbers, but to one man, a 75-year-old mathematician who has never held a sword, never commanded troops, and who would rather solve an equation than speak to another human being. His name is Archimedes, and he has turned the laws of physics into weapons of mass psychological destruction. The Roman Republic has conquered nations. They have crushed Carthaginian fleets and enslaved entire populations. But they cannot figure out how to get past an old man with a lever and a piece of string. The question that haunts this siege and should haunt us is this: what happens when raw intellect goes to war against raw power? And what does it cost when genius finally falls? To understand how one man humiliated Rome, we need to understand what Rome was up against. Syracuse wasn't just any city. It was the crown jewel of Sicily, a place where Greek culture, wealth, and philosophy had flourished for centuries. Its harbor was one of the busiest in the Mediterranean. Its theaters and temples rivaled Athens, and for 50 years it had been Rome's most loyal ally, thanks to one man, King Hiero II. During the First Punic War, when Carthage and Rome were tearing each other apart, Hiero looked at the two titans and made a bet. He sided with Rome. It was the right call. For half a century, Syracuse prospered under Roman protection, while the rest of the world burned. And during those golden decades, Hiero's cousin, a reclusive, eccentric mathematician named Archimedes, was given unlimited funding to pursue whatever abstract nonsense interested him: circles, spheres, levers, buoyancy. Nobody in Syracuse cared. They thought he was harmless. But in 215 BC, King Hiero died. His throne passed to his 15-year-old grandson, Hieronymus. And this is where everything went wrong. Teenage kings are disasters waiting to happen, and Hieronymus was no exception. He looked across the Mediterranean and saw Hannibal Barca dismantling Roman legions at Cannae, and he thought Rome was finished. So he did what impulsive, arrogant boys do: he switched sides. He broke the 50-year alliance and pledged Syracuse to Carthage. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The pro-Roman faction inside Syracuse erupted. Hieronymus was assassinated within 13 months, but the damage was done. The Carthaginian faction seized control, executed the remaining Roman sympathizers, and locked the gates. Syracuse was now officially at war with the Roman Republic. Rome's response was immediate and brutal. They dispatched Marcus Claudius Marcellus, a man whose nickname was the Sword of Rome. Marcellus was a legend. Years earlier, he had earned the Spolia Opima, the highest military honor in Rome, by killing an enemy king in single combat and stripping the armor from the corpse with his own hands. He was ruthless, efficient, and utterly confident. He looked at Syracuse and saw a quick payday Greek art. Gold, slaves, everything needed to fund the war against Hannibal. He assembled a massive fleet of 60 quinqueremes and thousands of legionaries who had been hardened by years of warfare. And he brought his secret weapon, the sambuca, a massive siege ladder mounted between two ships that could be raised like a drawbridge and dropped directly onto enemy walls. It had never failed. Marcellus was so confident that he joked to his officers about drinking up the sea and washing away the defenders. The Roman war machine rolled forward, loud and inevitable. But Marcellus had no idea what was waiting for him, because for decades King Hiero had been gently pestering his cousin, Archimedes, to stop wasting time on theory and build something useful. And Archimedes, annoyed by the interruptions but loyal to his family, had finally obliged. He had taken the abstract principles of leverage, trajectory, and geometry and translated them into nightmares. The walls of Syracuse weren't just walls. They were a killing machine designed by the smartest man who ever lived. The Roman fleet surged forward, oars churning white foam, the sambuca towers rising like skeletal giants. The Marines braced for arrows, for stones, for the usual chaos of siege warfare. But instead, they got silence, and then the walls moved. Massive wooden beams, hidden behind the fortifications, swung outward on pivot points. Hanging from the ends were iron claws shaped like talons, like the hands of some buried god reaching up from the deep. The Romans stared, confused, until the claws dropped. They fell with horrifying speed, crashing through decks or latching onto the prows of the quinqueremes. And then physics took over. Inside the city, teams of men pulled on counterweights. The ships began to rise, slowly, impossibly. The massive warships were hoisted out of the water, their bows lifted straight into the air like dying whales. Soldiers slid down the tilting decks, screaming, clawing for handholds, plunging into the sea in full armor. The ships dangled their vertical, draining, exposed, and then the claws released. The ships smashed back down into the harbor from a height of 20 feet. Keels snapped in half, water rushed in, the sambuca towers, Rome's pride, splintered into driftwood. The harbor became a graveyard, and the ships that stayed back, thinking themselves safe, were targeted by something else. Archimedes had calibrated catapults to firestones weighing over 600 pounds with terrifying accuracy. They punched through decks, crushed men, shattered oars. It wasn't a battle. It was a physics demonstration with human casualties. Marcellus, watching from his command ship, went silent. His invincible fleet was being picked apart like toys in a bathtub. He had come to conquer a city, and he had walked into a laboratory. But the Claw of Archimedes was just the opening act. As the surviving Roman ships pulled back to what they thought was a safe distance, something stranger happened. At noon, when the sun reached its zenith, a blinding light appeared on the walls, according to multiple ancient sources. Archimedes had arranged hundreds of polished bronze shields, or perhaps a massive parabolic mirror, to focus the Mediterranean sun into a concentrated beam. The Roman ships began to smoke. Then the pitch that waterproofed the hulls bubbled and ignited. Flames erupted across the fleet. Now, historians argue endlessly about whether this death ray was real or myth. Modern experiments have had mixed results, but here's what matters. Whether or not Archimedes created a literal laser, the psychological effect was total. The Romans believed it. They saw blinding light, they saw fire, and they believed they were fighting a sorcerer. They couldn't approach the walls without being crushed. They couldn't stay back without being burned or blinded. Marcellus, the sword of Rome, was checkmated by geometry. So Marcellus tried the land. Surely the claws and mirrors only faced the harbor. He ordered his legions to assault the northern gate, charging fast to get under the arc of the catapults and into the safe zone at the base of the walls. But Archimedes had anticipated this too. He had designed a tiered defense system. Long-range catapults hit the distant ranks. Medium-range engines hit the middle ground. And when the Romans finally reached the walls, where they should have been safe, they found something worse. Archimedes had pierced the walls with thousands of tiny loopholes. Through these holes, archers and scorpion bolt shooters fired point blank at the legionaries without ever exposing themselves. Iron bolts seemed to materialize out of the stone itself. There was no cover. There was no blind spot. Every inch of ground was a kill zone. Marcellus finally broke, but he didn't rage. In a moment recorded by Plutarch, he actually laughed a bitter, exhausted laugh. He looked at his engineers and said, "Shall we not stop fighting this geometrical Briareus who uses our ships as ladles and outdoes the 100-handed giants of mythology?" It was an admission of defeat. The sword of Rome acknowledged that he could not cut through pure thought. He called off all assaults. He couldn't take Syracuse by force. He would have to starve them out. The active war was over. The blockade had begun. For 2 years, the Roman army sat outside the walls, rotting in the Sicilian heat. Malaria bred in the marshes. Supplies dwindled. Morale collapsed. Inside Syracuse, the people felt invincible. They had the smartest man in the world protecting them. They had repelled the greatest army on earth. They grew complacent, confident, careless, and Marcellus, patient and calculating, was waiting for exactly that. He sent scouts to circle the walls, looking for a crack, a flaw, a single moment of weakness, and then fate handed him a gift. In 212 BC, Syracuse prepared for the festival of Artemis. After 2 years of siege and rationing, the city decided to celebrate. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets. Soldiers abandoned their posts to join the revelry. The watchtowers grew dark and quiet, and outside, in the blackness, Marcellus moved. He had selected 1,000 of his best men, elite scalers with nerves of steel. Weeks earlier, during a negotiation near the Triglavis harbor, a Roman observer had done something brilliant. He had counted bricks. He had measured the height of individual stones, estimated the mortar thickness, and calculated the exact height of a section of wall that was built on uneven cliffs. That section was lower than the others, and Roman scaling ladders would fit perfectly. Now, under cover of darkness and drunken celebration, Marcellus sent his men. They climbed in total silence. One ladder, then another. 1,000 men hanging by their fingertips between the Black Sea and the enemy city. Above them, they could hear laughter and singing. The first legionary reached the parapet. He pulled himself over. The tower guards were asleep, surrounded by empty wine cups. Their throats were slit before they woke. One by one, the towers fell. The Romans moved like ghosts, seizing the fortifications from the inside, and then they opened the hexapylon gate. At dawn, the citizens of Syracuse stumbled into the streets, hungover and confused, only to see Roman legions marching through their city. The trumpets blared. The nightmare was inside the walls. Panic consumed the city. The impregnable fortress had fallen not to a superweapon, but to a ladder and a bottle of wine. Marcellus rode through the gates and, according to the histories, wept. Perhaps he wept for the glory. Perhaps he wept for what came next, because under the brutal laws of ancient siege warfare, a city that resists has no right to mercy. The sack of Syracuse began. Soldiers looted temples, dragged families into the streets, stripped centuries of accumulated wealth. The air filled with smoke and screams. But in the midst of this apocalypse, one man remained utterly detached. In a quiet garden, away from the chaos, Archimedes was working. He was 75 years old. The noise of the dying city filtered past him like wind. He was bent over a box of sand, tracing a geometrical diagram. Perhaps he was calculating the volume of a sphere. Perhaps he was refining a proof that would take humanity another millennium to understand. The Roman legions were irrelevant. The only truth that mattered was the circle in the sand. Marcellus had given explicit orders: do not harm Archimedes. He wanted to capture the genius alive, to bring him to Rome, to learn from him. He sent soldiers specifically to find him. But fate is never that kind. A Roman soldier, nameless and exhausted, stumbled into the garden. He saw a stubborn old man ignoring him. He barked an order: "Get up, come with me to Marcellus." Archimedes didn't even look up. He waved his hand dismissively, his eyes fixed on the sand. He said the words that would echo through history: "Noli turber circulus meaus." Do not disturb my circles. It was the ultimate statement of a scholar. Your war is petty. Your empire is temporary. This truth in the sand is eternal. Step back, but the soldier didn't care about truth. He was adrenaline-fueled, blood-drunk, insulted. He drew his gladius and struck. There was no duel, no final speech, just a sharp thrust of iron. Archimedes fell onto his own diagram, his blood washing away the circles he had died to protect. When the news reached Marcellus, he was devastated. He called the soldier a murderer and ordered a solemn funeral for Archimedes, honoring him with all the rights of a noble. But it was too late. The brain that had held off an empire was gone. Rome had conquered the body of Syracuse, but in a single mindless stroke they had destroyed its mind. The siege was over. Rome secured Sicily and eventually crushed Carthage, but the death of Archimedes left a strange scar on the Roman conscience. Marcellus carried the guilt for the rest of his life, and history, as it often does, forgot. Fast forward 137 years. The year is 75 BC. A young Roman official named Cicero arrives in Sicily and asks the locals to show him the tomb of Archimedes. They said they didn't know where it was. In less than 2 centuries, the city had forgotten the man who saved them. Cicero didn't believe them. He remembered hearing that a sphere and cylinder were carved on the tombstone. He went into the overgrown graveyards outside the city, hacking through briars and brambles. And there, hidden under a thicket of weeds, he founded a small column, barely visible, topped with a stone sphere and a cylinder. Cicero cleared the brush and stared at the weathered geometric shapes. It was a moment of profound connection across time. The greatest mind of the Greek world was finally paid respect by the greatest voice of the Roman world. Cicero later wrote that the city would have known nothing of its most ingenious citizen had it not been learned from a man of Arpinum. The siege of Syracuse teaches us something uncomfortable. When the soldier killed Archimedes, he didn't just kill a man, he killed a way of thinking. He chose violence over understanding, impatience over curiosity. Rome had the swords, but they knew Syracuse had the brains. And in killing the brain, they won the battle, but lost something irreplaceable. Archimedes showed us that one person, armed with nothing but the laws of physics and the courage to think differently, can hold back the tide of inevitability. He also showed us that genius, no matter how brilliant, is fragile. It can be snuffed out in an instant by someone who doesn't understand its value. Syracuse fell, Rome fell, but the geometry remains. The lever still works. The sphere is still perfect. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of history, Archimedes is still there, bent over the sand, asking us not to disturb his circles, but to understand them.